The night my father made his toast, I was sitting at the far end of the table with a glass of sweet tea going warm in my hand. It was a Saturday in late August, the kind of humid Tennessee evening where the ceiling fans do nothing but push the hot air around in slow, useless circles. My aunt had strung white lights along the back porch. There were paper plates of pulled pork and corn on the cob and my grandmother's potato salad that nobody ever touched, because she always put too much mustard in it. It looked like a celebration. It was supposed to feel like one. My father stood up and cleared his throat the way he always did before he said something he wanted everyone to remember. He tacked his beer bottle with his wedding ring. Clink, clink, clink. "I want to say something about my son," he said. My brother was sitting to his left, already grinning. He was 31. He'd just been named regional sales director for a pharmaceutical company in Nashville. It was a real job. A good job. I'm not saying it wasn't. But the way my father looked at him in that moment, the way his whole face opened up, proud and soft and full. I had to look away. I was 32 years old. I had just passed the bar exam. Not just passed, I'd scored in the 93rd percentile. I had a job offer from the U.S. Attorney's Office waiting on my kitchen counter back in Atlanta. I hadn't told anyone yet because I hadn't found the right moment. I kept thinking the right moment would come. It didn't come that night. My father talked about my brother for 4 minutes, I counted. He talked about his drive, his determination, his natural ability with people. He talked about how proud he was. He said, "This kid never quit." He said, "This one's going places." He sat down without looking at me once. My stepmother refilled her wine glass and smiled at my brother and said, "We always knew." I excused myself and went inside to use the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror for a while with the water running. The person looking back at me seemed very far away. I thought, I have passed the bar. I have a federal job offer. I have worked every single day for the last decade towards something real, and no one in this house knows my middle name without having to think about it first. I turned off the water. I went back outside. I ate my food. I smiled when I was supposed to smile. I drove home at 9:30 and sat in my car in the parking garage of my apartment building for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. That was a year and a half ago. I want to tell you what happened after. I grew up in Clarksville. My father ran an HVAC business and my mother left when I was 7. Not dramatically, not in the night, just gradually and then completely, the way a tide goes out. She moved to Phoenix and remarried and sent birthday cards that always arrived 3 days late. My father remarried when I was 10. My stepmother was not unkind. She was just not particularly interested in me. My brother was my father's son from before my mother. Older by 4 years, tall, easy with people, the kind of person who walked into a room and made the room feel like it had been waiting for him. I was smaller and quieter, and I read too much and asked too many questions, and my father used to say, half joking, "She's gonna be a lawyer someday and argue everyone to death." He always said it like it was a flaw. I took that and I ran with it. I went to the University of Tennessee on a partial scholarship and worked 20 hours a week at a coffee shop to cover the rest. I graduated with honors. I got into Vanderbilt Law on my second application, the year after I'd been waitlisted. I cried in my car when the acceptance email came, then went back inside and finished my shift. My father's response when I told him, "Law school's expensive, you sure about that?" My brother's response, "Nice. Hey, can you help me move this weekend?" I didn't ask for their money. I took out loans. I deferred things I wanted, bought store-brand everything, ate a lot of rice and chicken thighs. I studied in the law library until midnight and woke up at 6. I made law review. I clerked for a federal judge during my second summer. By my third year, I had a standing offer from 2 firms and a serious conversation happening with the U.S. Attorney's Office. None of this made it home, not in any way that mattered. I came back for holidays. My father asked how school was going the way you ask someone how the weather is, not because you want to know, just because there's silence and it needs filling. My stepmother talked about my brother's apartment, his car, the woman he was dating. My grandmother, who was still sharp at 81, would squeeze my hand across the table and say quietly, "I see you, baby." She was the only one. She passed away the spring of my second year of law school. After that, I had less and less reason to go home. I went anyway. That's the part I still don't fully understand about myself. Why I kept going back, kept sitting at that table, kept waiting for something to shift. I think I wanted to be seen by the specific people who decided not to see me. That's the honest answer. I started at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Atlanta 8 months after I passed the bar. Federal prosecutor. Criminal division. I was the youngest in my unit by 6 years and the only woman, a fact that was never mentioned directly, but was present in every room like a piece of furniture everyone had to navigate around. My supervisor's name was Harrington. He was fair, exacting, the kind of person who didn't give compliments but also didn't give them when they weren't earned. The first time he told me a brief was solid, I almost asked him to repeat it. I was good at the work, not because I was naturally brilliant. I'm not, or at least not more than anyone else, but because I had been preparing for it my entire life without knowing that's what I was doing. Every time I sat at a table where I was invisible, every time I was talked over or looked past, every time I drove home and sat in a parking garage to decompress, it made me better at understanding how people dismiss things they don't want to see. That turns out to be very useful in a courtroom. I worked financial fraud cases, then public corruption. I was on a team that brought charges against a county commissioner who'd been skimming infrastructure contracts for 11 years. The case took 2 years to build. When the jury came back with guilty on all counts, I was standing at the prosecution table and I had to press my thumbnail into my palm to keep my face neutral. I called my father that night. I don't know why. I think I just wanted to tell someone who knew me before all of it. He picked up on the third ring and I told him we'd won the case, the big one. The commissioner case that had been in the Georgia papers. He said, "Oh yeah? That's great, honey." And then he said, "Hey, your brother's thinking about proposing to Kelsey. You think that's a good idea?" I said I didn't know Kelsey very well. He talked about Kelsey for 10 minutes. I got off the phone and stood at my kitchen window looking at the city lights and I thought, this is just how it is. This is the shape of this relationship. Stop expecting it to be different. I mostly succeeded at that. Mostly. The thing about my brother that I need you to understand is that he was not a villain. He wasn't cruel. He didn't actively work against me. He just occupied space. He took up all the air in the room by existing in it, and our father handed him the oxygen and considered that parenting, and my brother accepted it because why wouldn't you accept something that's given freely? But then came the February when everything shifted. I was working a public corruption case involving a state contractor, a man named, I'll call him the defendant because I won't give him the dignity of a name here, who had been falsifying safety inspections on public school buildings across 3 counties, children sitting in classrooms with load-bearing walls that hadn't been properly reinforced, electrical systems that were a fire hazard. He'd been doing it for 9 years. He'd pocketed $2.4 million in fraudulent approvals. My brother's company supplied materials to one of those schools. He'd done a sales deal with the contractor 18 months earlier. I found out during discovery. I called my brother immediately. I told him he needed to be transparent with his employer about the connection and that if anyone from my office contacted him, he should cooperate fully. I was clear. I was fair. I was his sister and I was a federal prosecutor and I kept those two things very carefully separate. He cooperated. He wasn't charged with anything. He had no knowledge of the fraud. He was fine. But he told my father about the phone call. And my father somehow, in the particular alchemy of his mind, heard my daughter called your son about a federal investigation and understood it as, my daughter went after your son. My father called me 3 days later. He was not yelling. He was worse than yelling. He was quiet and deliberate, the voice he used when he'd already decided something and was informing you of it as a courtesy. I think, he said, that you've always had a problem with your brother's success. I stood in my office. I had a brief due in 4 hours. I had my coat still on because I'd just walked in. Dad, I said, I'm not arguing about it. I'm just saying what I've observed. Since you were kids. I called him as a professional courtesy. I was protecting him. You could have sent someone else. I wanted him to hear it from me. There's always an excuse with you. I don't remember exactly what I said after that. I remember I kept my voice steady. I remember I got off the phone and sat down and looked at my computer screen for a while without seeing it. Then I opened the brief and started working. I did not call home for 4 months. The case went to trial in October. 12 days of testimony, 3 expert witnesses, a jury of 8 women and 4 men who sat and listened and looked at photographs of school hallways and electrical panels and structural reports. And on the 11th day of deliberation, they came back with a verdict. Guilty on all 14 counts. I was standing at the prosecution table again. Same thumbnail in the same palm. Harrington shook my hand afterward and said, "Good work, Ren." He almost never used first names, I noticed. My name is Ren Alcott. I should have told you that earlier. I was born in Clarksville, Tennessee, the second child of a man who loved his first child more completely and without reservation, and I became a federal prosecutor anyway, and I was 33 years old, and I was very tired of needing people to understand that those two facts were connected. My father reached out in November. A text, saw something about a big case. Was that yours? A local news station had covered the verdict. They'd spelled my name right. I didn't respond for 2 days. Then I wrote back, yes. He wrote, good job. That was it. That was the whole conversation. I put my phone down and made dinner and watched television and went to bed. But something had shifted in me. I realized I had stopped waiting. Not dramatically. There was no moment of decision, no scene where I looked in a mirror and said something to myself. It was more like one morning I woke up and the waiting was just gone. The way a headache you've had so long, you stop noticing it, suddenly isn't there anymore. I was not waiting for my father to see me. I had places to be. In December, my office received a commendation from the Department of Justice for the contractor case. Harrington forwarded it to the whole unit with a note that said, my work had been integral to one of the most significant public corruption prosecutions in the district's recent history. He CC'd the U.S. attorney. I printed it out. I folded it. I put it in my desk drawer and closed the drawer and went back to work. I did not call my father. The reunion was my stepmother's idea. My father's 60th birthday, late March, back in Clarksville. The whole family, my aunt and her husband, their 3 grown kids, my father's old business partner, neighbors I barely recognized. My stepmother had rented out the private room at a restaurant downtown. There were centerpieces. There was a slideshow. I almost didn't go. I went because my aunt called me and said, he's 60, Ren. You'll regret it if you don't come. My aunt was the kind of person who said things like that and was usually right. I booked a Friday flight. The restaurant was warm and loud and smelled like garlic bread. I hugged people I hadn't seen in years. I drank 1 glass of wine and then switched to water because I wanted to be completely clear-headed. My brother was there with Kelsey. They'd gotten engaged in January, and she was perfectly nice. She asked me questions about my job and actually listened to the answers. I liked her immediately and felt a complicated guilt about that. My father looked older. His hair had gone more gray. He hugged me when I walked in and said, you made it. Like my attendance was slightly surprising. I smiled and said yes. Dinner was served. Speeches happened. My brother spoke first, funny and warm, talked about what he'd learned from our father about persistence and showing up. People laughed. My aunt spoke. The old business partner spoke. I had not been asked to speak and I hadn't volunteered. Then my father stood up to say a few words himself. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about turning 60 and what he'd learned. He talked about the business, about Clarksville, about family. He looked at my brother and said, watching you build your life has been one of the great privileges of my life. He looked at me then, just briefly. He said, and Ren, she's doing something with the government down in Atlanta. We're all real proud. Something with the government. The table smiled at me. I smiled back. I picked up my water glass and I held it steady. Dessert was brought out. People started moving around, talking in smaller groups. I stepped outside to get some air. The March night was cooler than I expected. I stood on the sidewalk with my arms crossed and looked at the street and thought about nothing in particular. My phone buzzed. An email. I almost didn't open it. It was from a journalist at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He'd been doing a piece on federal prosecutors who'd shaped the trajectory of public corruption law in the Southeast, and my name had come up repeatedly. He wanted to do a profile. He said the story was running in the Sunday magazine the following weekend. He said a photographer would need maybe an hour of my time. He had already confirmed with my office. I read it twice. I was standing on a sidewalk in Clarksville, Tennessee, 40 feet from a room where my father had just described my career as something with the government, and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution wanted to profile me for their Sunday magazine. I went back inside. My brother was at the bar getting another drink. He saw my face and said, you okay? I said, yeah, I just got some news. He said, good news or bad news? I said, good, I think. He said, tell me. So I told him. I think. He said, tell me. So I told him. I watched his face while I talked. He looked, I want to be accurate here, he looked genuinely happy for me. He put down his drink and he said, Ren, that's incredible. Dad. He raised his voice. Dad, come here. My father came over from across the room. My brother said, tell him what you just told me. I told him about the email, the journalist, the Sunday magazine, the profile. My father looked at me for a long moment. His expression went through several things I couldn't entirely name. Then he said, "A profile? In the paper? The Sunday magazine," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know you'd gotten that big." That big? I turned that phrase over in my mind. "Yeah," I said. "I've been working on it for a while." My stepmother had drifted over. She'd heard pieces of it. She said, "The Atlanta paper? They're doing a story on you?" I said yes. She looked at my father. He looked at me. There was something shifting in the room. Some small recalibration I could feel but not quite see. My aunt appeared at my elbow. She'd heard the whole thing. She put her arm around me and said, loud enough for the table to hear, "This girl has been the most determined person I have ever known since she was 9 years old and figured out how to fix the riding mower by herself because nobody would show her." She squeezed my shoulder. "We're proud of you, baby. Genuinely proud. Not real proud. Genuinely." I did not cry. I came close once, in the bathroom a little later, but I pressed my hands flat on the counter and breathed, and it passed. I was not going to cry at my father's birthday party over being seen. I was too old for that and too tired, but I noticed the shift. My father found me later in the evening near the end of the night when people were saying goodbyes and putting on jackets. He touched my elbow. He said, "I want to hear more about this case, the school one. The contractor." He paused. "Sounds like it was important." I looked at him. He was 60 years old, and he had loved my brother more openly and more completely, his entire life. And here he was at the end of a birthday party asking me about my work, and I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't, fully. I said, "It was." Kids were sitting in unsafe buildings. We got him. My father nodded slowly. He said, "I didn't know the details. I wanted to say, you never asked. You had every opportunity to ask, you just didn't." I said, "I know." He said, "You turned out." He stopped, started again. "You did good, Ren." It was not an apology. It was not an acknowledgement of everything that went before. It was just 4 words from a 60-year-old man at his birthday party who was only just beginning to understand who his daughter actually was. I nodded. I said, "Thank you, Dad." I meant it, and I didn't mean it, and both of those things were true at the same time. The profile ran 10 days later. Sunday magazine, above the fold. The headline was, "The prosecutor nobody saw coming." There was a photograph of me in the courthouse atrium, looking at something off camera. I looked, I was told, very serious. I was told I looked like someone who had made a decision and was standing by it. My phone rang all morning. Colleagues. Old law school classmates. My aunt called and screamed a little. The good kind of scream. Harrington sent a 3-word text. "Well deserved, Alcott." My brother sent a voice memo, which he'd never done before, which meant he didn't know what to say and needed his voice to carry it. He said, "I just read the whole thing, Ren. I didn't know all of it. I didn't know how much you'd been carrying. I'm proud of you. I mean that. And I'm sorry if I ever—" He stopped. "I just wanted to say I'm proud." I listened to it twice. I saved it. My father texted, "Read it. That's my daughter." 3 words that cost him something, I think. 3 words that were too late and also not too late at all. I sat with them for a while. I did not text back immediately. I made coffee. I stood at my kitchen window. The city was already awake, already moving, indifferent and alive and going everywhere at once. Then I picked up my phone and I wrote, "Thanks, Dad. It took a while to get here." He wrote back, "I know. I don't know what he meant by that exactly. I'm not sure he does either." But there it was, sitting in my phone like a small incomplete thing that was also somehow enough. Not everything, not a repair of all those years, but a crack of light under a door that had always been closed. I'm not waiting for the door to open. I stopped doing that, but I'm not locking it either. Not anymore. I put on my shoes and I went outside into the Sunday morning, into the city that had watched me become something, and I walked until my coffee went cold and I didn't think about any of it for a while. That felt more than anything else like the right ending. I thought a lot about what it actually takes to keep going when the people who are supposed to see you simply choose not to. Not can't, choose not to. That distinction matters more than I used to let myself admit. My father is not a bad man. That's the complicated part. He worked hard, showed up, kept the lights on. But somewhere along the way, he decided that my brother's kind of success, visible, social, easy to explain at a dinner table, was the kind we're celebrating. And my kind, the quiet accumulation of difficult things over a very long time, just didn't register the same way. I don't think he did it on purpose. I think he just never looked closely enough to notice what he was doing. For years, I tried to solve that by achieving more, as if there was some threshold I hadn't crossed yet, as if the right case, the right title, the right headline would finally make the room turn toward me. That's not a strategy. That's a wound with a work ethic attached to it. What I know now, and I mean know it in my body, not just understand it intellectually, is that the work was never for him. It couldn't be. The moment you make your effort about someone else's recognition, you handed them the controls. You've made their attention the destination. And some people will never get on that flight, no matter how many times you show them the ticket. Ren Alcott didn't become a federal prosecutor because her father believed in her. She became one in spite of the fact that he didn't. And then she had to do the harder thing, which was stop keeping score, stop cataloging every overlooked moment, stop sitting at tables waiting to be toasted. The work had integrity because she gave it integrity. The cases mattered because the people harmed by those crimes were real. Children sitting in unsafe classrooms. Public trust corroded by greed. That was the thing worth showing up for. Every morning, every draft, every deliberation. Not to prove something to a man in Clarksville who still described her job as something with the government. Here's what I think is true about cause and effect. Separate from luck or favoritism or who your father loved more openly, the choices you make in the absence of applause are the ones that define you. When nobody is watching. When the file is due in 4 hours and you just got off a phone call that left you hollow. When you go back to your desk and open the document anyway. That steadiness. That refusal to collapse just because the room didn't clap. That accumulates into something. It becomes character. It becomes a record. It becomes eventually a Sunday magazine profile that a 60-year-old man reads over his morning coffee and finally, quietly, understands. My aunt said she'd seen it since I was 9 years old. My supervisor said my name with something in his voice. My brother left a voice memo that cracked in the middle. None of that erased the years of being invisible at that table. But it meant something anyway. You don't need everyone to see you. You need to keep being worth seeing. That's the only math that ever actually worked.